What is the biggest myth that you see when it comes to winter calf management?
I love this question because it gets me a little hot button, and I'm going to go there.
Welcome back to the Hoard's Dairyman podcast. As most of the country begins to brace for winter weather, how we manage calves through the harshest conditions is top of mind. Keeping growth rates on target through housing and feeding in cold is something that today's guest is very familiar with. Having earned her undergraduate degree at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, she escaped the cold winters of Wisconsin and finished her master's at the University of Florida, started her PhD in Florida, and finished her PhD coming back to Madison. With her thesis program on heat stress, we certainly can talk about the temperature extremes with our guest today. We welcome Bethany Dado-Senn to the podcast today, who works as a calf and heifer technical specialist at Vita Plus and serves as an assistant calf manager at her family's 500 cow dairy in northwestern Wisconsin. She also has 5,000 followers on a very active LinkedIn page. Bethany, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me today, Kylene. I'm excited to talk all things calves.
Great. So I gave a little bit of an intro, but would you mind giving us a bit of your background and the journey that took you to the role that you have today with a focus on calves?
Absolutely. So let's start back at the beginning in the year 2000 when my family came back to Four Hands Holsteins in northwestern Wisconsin. And like most young kids, I got put in charge of helping to feed calves. And you learn a lot of life lessons through that. Lots of early mornings and frustrations. And honestly, when I went off to school, I thought, if I never have to see a calf again, that would be okay. But lo and behold, the type of research that I ended up doing in graduate school had a lot to do with kind of the intersection of like these extreme temperatures in both that pregnant cow and her calf. And so I got the opportunity to basically run our own little mini farm as we raised calves from birth until weaning. I learned a lot through that process and then decided, you know what? There's really a lot of awesome research coming out about dairy calves. And I think there are some really great ways that we can take their management to the next level. So I pursued that for my first career out of grad school. And I've been with Vita Plus now for just over 3 years. And I really enjoy kind of blending that calf research background with the everyday practical management that our calf managers and dairy farmers have to balance on a day-to-day basis.
That's great. So, what territory do you cover for your role?
I cover pretty much wherever they send me, but I'd like to say northern Wisconsin, all of Minnesota, and northern Iowa. So I get to see a lot of like auto feeders in the central Minnesota area, but then also some of those larger operation setups over in eastern Wisconsin and a great pocket of dairies down there in Iowa as well.
So, calves, everybody's been talking about how valuable calves are, right? You can't miss that. Um, Regardless of where that calf is bound for as a replacement or a beef on dairy calf that's headed for the beef supply chain. If you wouldn't mind talking to us, starting from the maternity pen and colostrum management and the basics that you recommend, and specifically, as we're starting to that shift into, real winter weather in the upper Midwest and the northern half of the U.S., do you recommend any management changes with the cold weather?
Absolutely. So I like to kind of start back with the why. And most farmers, when you say, oh, I'm going to talk about colostrum today, they roll their eyes because they get the why. But what I think we better understand now is that there is a very strong relationship between calves that fail on their serum total proteins and those calves that end up getting sick and dying. It's a very, very strong relationship. So when calves have a failed passive transfer, that likely means that something was going on in the maternity area and things were a little bit off with the colostrum program. So it's a really critical piece to keeping our calves around, which, as you said, they're very valuable. So let's focus on doing that. So uh, the benchmarks are pretty standardized across the industry, and they're based on the Dairy Calf and Heifer Association's gold standards. And they're what I typically recommend too. So for that first feeding, we want to feed it within the first 2 hours of life and target a quality of about 22 to 24% bricks, which can also be measured on that refractometer. And then we're going to want to give a volume between 3 and 4 quarts, depending on our calf size. And you don't have to nuance it and like weigh your calves and say, okay, it's 3.2 quarts. Nope, just say like in general, if I have smaller calves, jerseys, let's hit 3 quarts. And then if I have larger calves, 4 quarts is our goal. Now, what we're hoping to focus on as part of the Calf and Heifer Gold Standards Committee is now emphasizing the second feeding. There's a lot of research that says if we can get another feeding within the first 12 hours, that calf is going to expand her immunoglobulin uptake and have better serum total proteins. So for the second feeding, we want to target that within the first 12 hours. We don't have as strong of a target for the bricks, but I kind of just say rule of thumb, like a 19% or better. And then we can feed a little bit lower volume here, like 2 to 3 quarts, so we don't stress that calf out by filling her up with too much colostrum. And something that I just heard Dr. Terry Olivet share at a recent calf conference that I really like is that the second feeding should be done by bottle. The reason being is that calf comfort thing. We don't want to stuff her full of colostrum through tube feeding and not give her the chance to tell us, hey, this is how hungry I actually am. And then follow up for your cold stress question. We do know that cold stress will impair the absorption of our immunoglobulins. So everything that we can do to keep that calf warm, so that includes towel drying once she's first born and putting her in a warm environment like a hot box or a warm room, that's going to be a good way to rubber stamp that colostrum program and make sure that we're making the most out of it.
Yeah, it's quite the temperature shock when you think of cow body temperature to, could be air temperature of -20 that we have.
Yes. I'm sure many of the farmers listening to the podcast can attest. They see the steam just billowing off of newborn calves when they come out of the womb.
Yeah, it is. It was quite a temperature change if you think about that, and it's a shock for those newborn calves. So you started talking about the second colostrum feeding. Let's dive in. I've been listening to lots of calf webinars and topics recently. What are your thoughts on additional colostrum beyond that second feeding?
Absolutely. Again, kind of a whole bunch of research coming out of like Cornell University or the University of Guelph that supports the idea of extending colostrum feeding anywhere between like 4 days up until the first 2 weeks. Obviously, we have the constraints of how much colostrum and transition milk we're able to harvest, but whatever we are able to accumulate can really benefit calves. I think this is a really cool graphic from Cornell. They show that when you do the first and second feeding, you're only capturing about 25% of those immunoglobulins that really get calves on the right foot, and the other 75% gets lost into the milk stream if we're not feeding it back to calves. So a real opportunity missed there, I think, if we're not exploring some of that transition milk. We can see that there's improvements in calf health, calf growth, and we're just beginning to see maybe if there's some long-term benefits when it comes to lactation performance of these transition milk-fed calves.
Yeah, it's really, your research that I know you worked on, it's crazy to think the impact that at day 1 and day 2 of life has on that cow's lactation, that calf's lactation when she becomes a part of the milking string. It's really, and multiple generations. So any the heat stress and cold stress that can be impactful in the future is just, mind-boggling to think that's a 5-year and beyond impact.
Absolutely. Kind of a no pressure situation, right? You got to get it right from the get-go.
Right. Just for the long term. Oh gosh. Well, I just wanted to shift gears a little bit. You, like I mentioned in the introduction, you have a really great LinkedIn page that you do a lot of engaging posts on, and I think it's really fun to read your posts that you share. So if anybody listening isn't already a follower, highly advise going in and following Bethany. You had a post where you talked about 3 sneaky factors influencing average daily gain that doesn't reflect true performance. Can you tell us about those 3 sneaky factors?
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for the shout out. I really love engaging with everyone on LinkedIn. And it actually kind of goes back to what we were just talking about of like long-term impacts. So recently, progressive dairy farmers are really interested in using average daily gain as a benchmark for their calf success, partially because we know that when a calf has an elevated average daily gain as a pre-weaned calf, she's going to make more milk as a 2-year-old. However, we have to understand that this range can be pretty broad and it can be influenced by things outside of her actual physiology. And so those 3 sneaky factors that I talked about in that post relate to more management accuracy. So the first being our scale head and our scale itself. Is it an accurate scale, or is it jumping numbers around everywhere? If that scale deviates by even just 10 pounds from the actual body weight of that calf, you're going to have a swing of almost 2 points of average daily gain, which I can tell you from the field is often less than what my farmers are wanting to see their improvement in. So I've got very limited windows here to get my calves up to where they need to be. The second factor that can influence things is an accurate calf birth weight. So we mentioned feeding colostrum quickly. Well, unfortunately, when we put in that 4 quarts or gallon of colostrum, that's over 8 or 9 pounds of liquid going into that calf that can influence her actual core body weight. And then finally, I think most interestingly is that we need to make sure that our weaning weight is reflecting what we want to actually accomplish. So a weaning weight that's collected at 56 days of age is not going to be the same as one that's collected at 90. Because what many might not think about is that the growth curve for dairy calves is actually not linear. It's more exponential. So towards the tail end around the weaning period, that calf can be gaining closer to like 2.5 or 3 pounds per day average daily gain, which means that every additional day we give her, her average daily gain is going to look better, which is, again, great for the calf specialist. You know, I can push it back. But again, it depends on what the goal of that farm is. Do they want to know how their calves are performing in an earlier weaning state, or are they a farm that's already pushing weaning back to 70, 80, or 90 days, and they want that later weight to reflect what's actually going on? Again, comes down to that management decision, but we also have to understand that we're not always comparing apples to apples when we look at average daily gains across different farms.
Oh, that's great. That's really, really great point. And I will say in your post, you had some great photos of scales. That's a good point on reminders of keeping your scales clean as well.
Yes,
accuracy.
yes. Yes, that's important in my role, just because we're bringing scales to different farms and the biosecurity stuff there.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So again, well, this wasn't intentional, but the upper Midwest just had a big snowfall and a big temperature drop earlier than we've seen in recent years. And so winter housing of calves is right at top of mind. What recommendations do you have when you're recommending the herds that you work with on putting calf jackets on? And then also, sometimes it warms up in the winter and we get these stretches of, warm weather. What temperature do you recommend jackets come off?
So I guess my first call would be, if you don't have your calf jackets on this weekend, you are in that snow dump area, please put your calf jackets on. It is certainly cold enough now. The general rule of thumb that we use for when to start the process is when we combine the minimum and maximum temperature of the day and it's less than 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's say in the morning it's 30 degrees and then by the afternoon it warms up to 50. That combined 80 degrees is still cool enough where I want to see calf jackets on my younger babies at least. For the age range, I would definitely recommend that benchmark for any calf that's between 0 and 3 weeks of age, but you can push it up to 3 to 6 weeks because I know how it gets, right? We're not always monitoring closely which calves are which age and everything, but we just want to make sure that there's enough time between when we take that calf jacket off and when we move her out of her pen so that she's not figuring out how to live life without it and then also has to have a pen move. So I also err on the side of let's just keep it on once it starts warming up. Temperature swings are tough on calves too. So it never hurts to have a little extra insulation until calves are physically sweating.
Oh, that's a good rule of thumb. I did not heard the 90-degree fact before, and that's an easy one to remember. And it really means, you can go pretty far south in the U.S. and sometimes need to have those calf jackets on, and west for that matter.
Absolutely.
So, would you mind talking about, I know another post that you had, which was really great, when you talk about pair housing. What benefits have you seen? And then if you talk specifically to winter pair housing, and then maybe we could shift to, summer weather pair housing.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of pair housing. I'm not seeing it implemented quite as much up here in the Midwest yet. I think primarily due to the concerns about cross-sicking. And I know that's an ongoing issue that researchers are trying to address. But let's say that we do want to try out that pair housing situation. The reasons for testing it out would be including benefits like grain intake. We know that calves that are grouped either in pairs or small groups learn from each other and eat grain faster and in higher volumes. And they also have a lot of like cognitive and behavioral type benefits. They just do well interacting with other calves, especially before they move to their next post-wean housing when they are typically in groups. So what some of the researchers in the pair housing space, so like Jennifer Van Oss at UW-Madison and Dr. Emily Miller-Cushion down at Florida, have looked at is some of the seasonal impacts that pair housing might have. So in a warmer climate like Florida, not surprisingly, it's those winter months where pair housing really shines because you have some of those benefits of learning from that other calf without the combined effect of like being too close to a pen mate and generating heat. So in the winter in Florida, pair house calves are going to have reduced fever incidence, they're going to have increased grain intake, and they're going to have higher levels of growth. Now, conversely, when Dr. Jennifer Van Oss and her student, Dr. Kim Reuscher, looked at pair housing in the winter in Wisconsin, they didn't see as many benefits when it came to calf performance, but they did still see that behavioral difference where calves really liked to spend time together in that hutch. And they did see that that improved some of the temperatures inside the hutch. So, I think that's partially because winter months really encourage a lot of starter intake for calves in general, especially up here in the Midwest. But it certainly doesn't concern me that there wasn't a difference. I think some of those cognitive and behavioral differences on their own are enough for me to be like, yeah, I'd really like to see how this would work on my own farm.
I've seen Nina von Kaiserlink speak on that as well with the paired housing benefits. And it's just really incredible research that's going on with that as well. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about myths that you see. And again, you get on lots of dairies in the upper Midwest. What is the biggest myth that you see when it comes to winter calf management?
I love this question because it gets me a little hot button, and I'm going to go there. So my myth busting is that we do not need to feed more milk in the winter. The reason being that we should be feeding more milk year round. And let me explain why. So historically, you'll hear lots of people talk about, okay, like increase your milk volumes in the winter or add some additional solids. My counter argument to that is like, okay, let's say you get to the springtime and you're like, okay, I'm going to drop it back down. Well, we're about to enter heat stress season where you're going to need some of that additional energy anyway. Or you want to see improvements in your average daily gain, as we just discussed. Dropping down your total milk calories is not going to help you get there. Typically, what I see is farms that are doing relatively appreciable volumes and quantities of milk replacer are those that raise a really nice, well-rounded calf because they have that baseline energy for that calf just to exist, kind of that forecourt total philosophy or that 20/20 milk replacer that we saw 20 years ago. But then they build on top of that and they go up to 8 quarts to 10 quarts of a high quality, higher fat milk replacer, and their calves just thrive because that additional energy that's there helps with things like immune response, organ development, whole body growth. And as we talk about the value of these replacement animals, why would we just meet them at their bare minimums when we can provide that extra to really grow a nice pre-weaned calf and then eventually a mature lactating cow?
Yeah, that's really a great point. I'm glad I got that button pushed on that question for you. So we've talked a little bit of winter, and you did talk a bit about, heat stress, and, heat stress impacts the entire country. What advice do you have for producers as they're looking ahead to next summer, or for those parts of the country that, they get a little break before the heat starts again? How would you recommend they prepare for the next round of heat stress?
So I love talking about heat stress this time of year because it feels like I get to be the only one with it being so cold. But it is definitely even around this time that we want to start doing some mental audits of where our heat stress management program currently is and what we're going to need for next year. So that could look like okay, let's take a look in our lactating cow barns. How many fans do we have? Do any appear to be broken and needing fixing or replacement? Cleaning is a big one, either of our fans or our tubes in our barns. Now is the time to be thinking about those things and putting them on the to-do list for like March or April. Another thing that I would want people to think about as we get into kind of that early springtime is knowing that for dairy calves, we have a threshold of around 76 degrees Fahrenheit or so, where heat stress starts to become a concern for our dairy calves, which is pretty low if you think about it. 75 is very comfortable for humans, but calves start to show heat stress signs around that point. So I think that supports the notion that providing heat abatement earlier, both on our lactating and dry cow side, but also for our calves, can actually be some benefit there. So for dairy calves, what we know right now is doing things like maximizing ventilation in calf hutches, maybe bringing in some summer designed positive pressure tubes, could be some ways that we promote heat abatement for our dairy calves. And now might be the time to start thinking about like, okay, where might I purchase some of those, or start to modify some of my hutches to get ready for next year.
So you talked about the positive pressure ventilation systems, and I actually spoke with a producer a couple of weeks ago who built a calf barn that I saw you had given a shout out as well. Where would you recommend someone go if they wanted to build an ideal, like get a design set for a new calf barn that they wanted to implement, especially from a ventilation standpoint?
So most folks who have some ventilation background are going to be trained through the Dairyland Initiative. They host kind of biannual workshops on assessing ventilation in both lactating cow and calf barns. So they actually have a pretty cool list. You can just go online and see who's accredited. I'll plug myself. I happen to be accredited. So if you want me to come out and measure the specs of your barn, basically what we do is we look at the total air volume in your facility and look at constraints of height and where skid steers might go and where things might be blocking airflow. And we say like, okay, this would be a good place for a tube. Let's figure out where the air holes need to go, how many air holes there need to be in order to get the right pressures. And then we send that out to tube development companies and get specs back for our dairy farmers to order and put those tubes in.
Oh, I didn't even recognize that when I asked that question. So I'm glad that worked out that you can give yourself a shout out to be a reference
Yes.
for that. So
yes, but many veterinarians and calf nutritionists are going to be trained in that. So certainly you can ask your vet as well.
yeah, no, that's great. I was not aware of that. And it was actually a question that spurred from that conversation since people were looking at, how do we plan if we're thinking ahead to building and the architecture, and just so many things to think about when building a new calf facility or upgrading an existing facility as well.
Yes, and that's something I would mention too, that I love the Dairyland Initiative. So shout out Courtney and Nigel for putting a lot of this research out there. But something else that they talk a lot about is to your point about like retrofitting current spaces. We have lots of options for those as well in building tubes. Those can be trickier because a lot of the times with like lower ceilings in old step-up parlors, we have fewer cubic feet to work with. So that's definitely what I would recommend bringing in some sort of ventilation specialist to help you figure out what's going to work best for your smaller footage there.
Yeah, they do a great job, and they have a great podcast too. I will shout out their podcast. They're very entertaining, and they do a very good job. So
wasn't sure if I was allowed to shout out the podcast.
Yes, you can definitely do that. We do cover a lot of the things that they cover as well. So it's been really, really great to watch them and learn from them and all of the research that they have. It's really a powerful group. We talked about retrofitting calf facilities and upgrading. How do you recommend someone put an auto feeder into a facility? And how do they plan for that?
Yeah, so auto feeders, I think, they're a technology that's been around now for a little while, and people are finding really unique ways to leverage it. But I think there are some baseline rules that in order to have a successful auto feeder program, we need to follow. So first and foremost, we need to think about our calf flow in terms of the number of auto feeders that we need to put in. So kind of the ideal group size is going to be 18 calves or less in an auto feeder pen. And I know a lot of farms don't like to hear that because it's probably not even the average number of calves in most of our facilities. But as we get larger group sizes, the risk of pathogen spread in sick calves gets a lot higher, and we lose a lot of the benefit of that group housing that we see in smaller groups. If we are going to go to a larger pen size, everything that we can do to limit how sick our calves get by backgrounding calves individually before they go in the auto feeder and keeping things really clean, that's some ways that we can lower that risk, especially for larger group sizes. So when it goes back to calf workflow, keeping that number within the right space and also keeping age range within pen at a lower number. We don't want an age spread over 2 weeks because, again, older calves can spread disease down to younger calves. So that tends to be the general consensus there.
We talked about cross-suckling when we talked about pair housing. Do you see that as a concern when people are transitioning to auto feeders? And is that, I mean, I have been in several auto feeder facilities and haven't seen a lot of cross-suckling, but it seems like they're getting that instinct taken care of with the auto feeder. So I don't know what you probably see a lot more than I have, and love to know your view on that.
So anecdotally, I would say that I would agree with you that I don't see quite as much of a cross-sucking concern in an auto feeder setting, though some farms listening might be like, yeah, right, Bethany, I still see that. And I'm like, I certainly believe you if that is the case. But I think there's a few factors within the auto feeder that helps limit that. First of all, they have access to a nipple 24/7, even if they aren't at a spot where they're at a rewarded meal, they can still go up and get an unrewarded visit. Now, that gets a little bit tough on their nipple qualities. A lot of auto feeder farms will complain about having to switch out nipples a lot, especially on their older, like close to weaning age calves. So that's, kind of a bummer, but at least it helps with the oral fixation. Second thing that helps with auto feeders and cross-sucking is that we have more frequent meal offerings. So it depends on how you space out your feeding program, but typically most auto feeders will let calves have anywhere between 4 to 6 meals a day, again, depending on volume and how things are spaced out. But when we compare that to the 2 to 3 meals that calves would get in a hutch pair house situation, that can certainly help with the satiety factor and keeping calves off each other a little bit.
Well, I guess I'll wrap up because you had a great several things that you've put on for fun facts. So I'll go to the fun facts. And you played the clarinet for the UW Marching Band, or University of Wisconsin-Madison, and you taught bandmates how to moo like a cow in heat. So tell us about that.
I just really hope you don't ask me to demonstrate what that sounds like over.
Everybody listening would know what a.
Yes, we all know what that sounds like. Yes. So as a little background, I'm not quite sure how many ranks there are in the band, at least somewhere around 40 ranks. And so within each rank, there's about 12 members, and there's only one rank of clarinets. So we were a close little bunch. And within the first couple of weeks, once I made the band, we're sitting there, we're chatting on the side in our small little group, and we're just talking about, some of the funny sounds we make while we're marching. And someone's like, yeah, I sound like a cow. I just go moo. And I was like, did you know that cows actually have lots of different sounds? And I went through the whole spectrum, and I ended with that one, just the high pitched, 3 times in a row, and then the low rumble at the end. And everyone just thought that was the coolest thing. And unfortunately, I had to repeat that many times throughout the year.
I love that. Oh, it's good. You got egg education to your bandmates as well.
Yes, so. Yeah. Although, fun fact on that note, there are quite a few agricultural majors who will end up in the marching band. Kylene, I know you and I were both in the Association of Women in Agriculture, and there's a whole bunch of AWA alumni who did both. So I think that's a pretty cool camaraderie to share with those people.
Yes, that is very true. And that's the College of Ag has a lot of talented musicians. I will say that as well. Mm-hmm. So that's very good. And then last fun fact, again, I'm stealing from a post that you had, but I thought this was very entertaining, that you have not had good luck with tires. So tell us about your bad luck with tires.
So those that work in agriculture pretty much in any capacity know that it involves a lot of driving. And I was hoping to avoid that when I got my first job, but it's pretty much unavoidable. So I'm on the road probably 3 days a week. I put on probably about 35,000 miles a year. And I unfortunately just can't keep a good set of tires under my legs. The first one was my fault. I was that poor grad student. So right after I started at Vita Plus, I didn't change my tires as soon as I should have. And they were relatively worn and eventually just burst on the side of the highway on 94. I had to put emergency set on. Unfortunately, that emergency set was not as high quality as I thought. So 6 months later, a whole new set of 4 went on. And then about 2 years later, I hit a truck tire on the road and alignment went off, and then a new set of tires went on. So I know a lot about tires now that I never thought I would. So if you ever want to know what tire PSI should be, hit me up. I'm your not mechanic.
All the tire salespeople are listening to this thinking that they can't wait for your next tire sale opportunity.
Yes, it probably will happen. And, again, a lot of the farmers on here are really awesome mechanics, so they're probably just face palming. And I know I need to be better about that, but it's kind of a learn as you go situation.
Oh, that's great. Well, this was really fun to have you on the podcast. And we really appreciate you talking about not just the winter weather and, preparing for when we'll see heat stress again in most parts of the country. So, Bethany, we really appreciate you joining us today and giving us this practical insights and your expertise and experience in calf care. So, you've been listening to Bethany Dado-Senn, calf technical expert with Vita Plus. If you want to be the first to catch these conversations, make sure you're following us on YouTube or your favorite podcast player so you don't miss a beat. And if this episode added value for you, send it to someone who would appreciate it too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Hoard's Dairyman podcast. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. See you next time.